Good morning, everyone. My name is Naijma. I am the EU Project Manager for IDIT. First, thank you to Alice for hosting this webinar, and generally, thank you to the Seamless project. It provides us within the Horizon Europe program great platform to address highly relevant regulatory aspects related to automation in transports and logistics. Next slide, please. IGIT is the Institute of International Law for Transport, Logistics, Mobility, and New Energy. We are a research and legal expertise center specializing in regulatory dimensions in EU and national projects. Across these four domains, we focus on the connection between technological innovation, legal framework, and public policy. We work closely with a wide range of actors, including institutional organizations, regulatory and public authorities, and private stakeholders. This positioning allows us to act as a neutral and legal partner in European projects. Next slide, please. Our role is to act as a bridge between innovation and regulation. Projects develop new technologies, pilots, and operational concepts. Consequently, these innovations must fit within existing legal frameworks or sometimes highlight the need to adapt them. Generally, our contribution usually covers three main areas. We analyze applicable EU and national framework, regulatory framework, and the identification of possible risks and barriers. We support the experiment, and we translate project results, and policy-oriented recommendations and support dissemination through publications, webinars, and conferences. With this approach, IDIT helps ensure that innovation is not only technically feasible, but also legally viable. Next slide, please. In Seamless, we contribute through three main missions. This past year, we carried out a comparative legal analysis of existing EU and national frameworks relevant to autonomous waterborne transport. IDIT is now focusing on the legal implications of automation on human roles, including crew, remote operators, skills, training, and responsibilities. Scheduled next, our institute will contribute to policy development and dissemination activities, engaging with many stakeholders to support the visibility of the Seamless results. Together, this contribution ensures that Seamless addresses not only technological challenges, but also the legal and policy conditions necessary to a real-world deployment. Thank you very much. With this introduction, I will now hand over to my colleague, Iolande Viricel, PhD and Legal Research Officer at IDIT.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much, Alice, for hosting this webinar. It gives me the opportunity to present part of the research I am currently leading within the Seamless project. From a legal perspective, when we look at the automation of ships, the very first question that arises is a question of qualification. In simple terms, can automated ships be regarded as ships like any other? Throughout this presentation, I will use the terminology found in applicable legal instruments rather than technical or engineering classifications. Having clarified the purpose of this presentation, I will now briefly define its scopes and limits. The analysis focuses exclusively on maritime law and on the legal notion of the ship. Inland navigation is therefore excluded. The presentation will be illustrated through two Seamless use cases. First, the ASCO maritime ship tested in Norwegian territorial waters, and second, the Zulumas concept designed for a maritime route between Belgium and the United Kingdom. Before turning to automated ships themselves, a short clarification on the legal approach is necessary. Legal rules, whether national, European, or international, do not all have the same legal value. They are traditionally represented through what is known as the Kelton pyramid. When analyzing national law, we must always verify its compliance with international law. In case of incompatibility, international law prevails. While there is no formal hierarchy among international treaties, international obligations take precedence over domestic law. In our case, two main sources are relevant. First, international treaties concluded outside the European Union framework, such as the SOLAS Convention, and second, European Union law consisting of regulations and directives. European regulations apply directly and uniformly within member states, whereas directives require national transposition. The nature and legal value of these documents are therefore decisive for the analysis. With this legal framework in mind, let us step back briefly and recall how international maritime law developed.
Iolande, if I may just interrupt for a second, because your voice is very, very low, and you have your mic probably touches something that we hear, and we hear all those scratches. So if you could, yeah,
Is it is it better now?
probably. Let's see.
Okay,
Thank you so much. I'm sorry.
okay. It evolved. So the international maritime law evolved alongside shipping and trade. The sinking of the Titanic marked a decisive turning point and led to the adoption of the first SOLAS Convention in 1914, establishing minimum safety standards for merchant ships. There is no single universal definition of a ship. Nevertheless, existing legal instruments constantly refer to ship navigating at sea. Against this background, I will now turn to the work carried out at the international level on automated ships. Since 2017, the International Maritime Organization, and more specifically its Maritime Safety Committee, has been working on maritime autonomous surface ships. This work led to the regulatory scoping exercise completed in 2021 and forms the basis for the development of the draft mass code. For the purposes of the regulatory scoping exercise, the IMO identified 4 degrees of autonomy. At the lower degrees, a human is always present on board. At degree 3, the ship is unmanned but remotely controlled. At degree 4, the ship is fully autonomous without human supervision, either on board or ashore. The IMO no longer uses these autonomy levels as a formal framework, although they still appear in some documents. An important point emerging from the most recent drafting work is that, regardless of the degree of automation, a master is expected to remain responsible for the ship. At this stage, the mass code remains non-binding. Since there is no binding international legal definition, it's necessary to look at how terminology is shaped. An ISO standard adopted in May 2022 provides useful terminological clarification. However, this standard is voluntary and becomes mandatory only if it's expressly referred by legislation. In practice, several terminologies coexist. Some states have adopted national regulations and automated ships, but these definitions apply only within their territorial waters. This lack of international harmonization explains why states have adopted different domestic approaches. In France, since 2021, the Transport Code defines an autonomous ship as a ship operated remotely or by its own operating systems, whether or not seafarers are on board. In Belgium, a royal decree of June 2021 refers to unmanned ships and allows experimental use under strict safety conditions. In Norway, a circular issued in 2020 provides technical guidance but does not establish a comprehensive statutory framework. These different regulatory approaches can be illustrated through the seamless use cases. The ZuluMass concept would operate without crew on board and under remote control. It would broadly align with what was described as a degree-free ship under the RSE terminology. The ASCO maritime ship is described as an electric self-driving ship transporting trailers and containers. Here, the terminology raises legal ambiguity, particularly the distinction between a ship and a maritime drone. This difference is crucial as drones fall outside the scope of maritime law. Once a ship is identified as it, the next step is to examine the consequences in terms of seaworthiness. If the ESCO ship qualifies as a ship, it must comply with traditional seaworthiness requirements regardless of registration. International conventions, such as the Brussels Convention, require ships to be properly manned and equipped. National laws reflect similar principles. In Norway, while the traditional concept of seaworthiness has been replaced by a broader notion of safety in domestic law, international obligations continue to apply. Beyond technical compliance, the human element remains central. Assuming the ship meets all technical and flight requirements, the key question is whether the roles of the master and the crew must be exercised on board, or whether they may be performed remotely. This issue can be studied by contrasting Norwegian and French law. Under international law, the master is the person in command of the ship. Moreover, the master is considered to be a member of the crew. As Norwegian law does not specifically define the master of an autonomous ship, existing rules continue to apply. As a result, the ESCO maritime ship is currently operated with a reduced crew, including a master. Let us now turn to the French legal framework. Under French law, the master, referred as the captain, is defined as the person who exercises de facto command of the ship. French law allows this command to be exercised remotely. A person located ashore may therefore qualify as captain if exercising command. However, formal qualifications remain necessary for that person to be legally considered as embarked. At international level, this issue is still under discussion. The principle that a master remains responsible has been reaffirmed, while the precise allocation of roles between on-board and shore-based personnel is still under discussion. Closely linked to the role of the master is the question of minimum safe manning. International and European rules require ships to carry a sufficient number of crew. In Norway, exceptions may be granted on an experimental basis, provided that an equivalent level of safety can be demonstrated. French law goes one step further by expressly addressing unmanned ships. It allows human resources to be wholly or partly non-embarked, provided that appropriate qualifications are held. However, the legal status of remote workers remains largely undefined, particularly from an employment law perspective. To conclude, automated ships remain, in principle, ships like any other. They must comply with fundamental requirements relating to seaworthiness and safety. However, the absence of a fully harmonized international framework still creates uncertainty, particularly regarding remote control and human roles. According to the current roadmap discussed within the Maritime Safety Committee, a non-mandatory mass code is expected to be adopted in 2026, followed by a progressive experience building phase. A mandatory code is envisaged for the early 2030s, with entry into force around 2032. Jérôme will provide further useful insights on the latest developments in just a few minutes. The coming years will therefore be decisive in determining whether automated ships will remain legally ships like any other, or whether they will gradually form a distinct legal category. Thank you very much for your attention.